So a few weeks ago I told you the story of the Tokyo Olympics in 2020 and all the problems that they are facing. As you know, the Olympic Games are one of the most expensive events that a city can host. Nonetheless, usually city halls go crazy to get a chance to organize the Olympics. Usually, they always have the support of their national governments and their citizens. In fact, each time they make a survey, most of the people are happy about hosting the Olympic Games. The main opinion is that an event like the Olympics brings a lot of good into the country. It increases tourism, the host city gets renovated, and the country becomes fashionable, attracting investors and businessmen from all over the world. Well, if you've seen our video about Tokyo, you know that this isn't exactly true. In fact, the Olympics can create big problems, and Japan might end up going bankrupt from going so far over budget. In fact, we can say there is a big debate about whether it's good or bad to host the Olympic Games. And guess what? Olympic excitement is not exactly having its best hour.
Until 2012, each time the International Olympic Committee met to choose the next host city, there were around 5 candidates. However, the 2024 Games had just 2 candidates, Los Angeles and Paris. Many capitals like Budapest or Rome retired their bid at the last minute, and others like Hamburg in Germany organized a referendum where citizens voted against hosting the Olympics.
Yes, you heard that right. There is general disappointment about the Olympics, and this might be a big problem for the International Olympic Committee. If nobody wants to host, what could happen to the future of the Olympic Games? And the bigger question, of course, is, is this the end of the Olympic spirit? So what could we do to keep the Olympic flame burning? Well, today we're going to answer all of those questions, but before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
Olympic breakfast.
I'm sure that every one of you knows that the Olympic Games were created in ancient Greece. But the truth is that the modern Olympics has nothing to do with Mount Olympus. It really started in the year 1896 with a French-born baron named Pierre de Coubertin along with a Greek man named Evangelos Zappa. They convinced the Greek government to organize some games the same way that the ancient Greeks had. Back then, nationalism was high in Greece, so everything that helped to inflame the national pride was seen as a good idea by the government. This is how the first modern Olympics were organized in Athens. Nonetheless, Pierre de Coubertin had bigger plans than simple nationalist propaganda. This could be an international event. But in order to achieve this, the host city had to rotate. This is how the International Olympic Committee, also known as IOC, was born. The IOC is an organization responsible for ensuring that every 4 years we have the Winter Olympics, the Summer Olympics, and the Paralympics. Put another way, this committee's mission is to promote sport and tolerance among nations. And this was a pretty wonderful idea. But do hold on for just a second, because we are just getting started with our story. The first Olympic Games were pretty modest events that were organized next to international exhibitions. But things really changed in the year 1936. As you know, back then, Nazi Germany, they were about to start their world conquest. To this end, they needed to improve their image abroad. And the idea of wrapping themselves with the flag of sport, excellence, and tolerance between nations sounded like heaven to the ears of Adolf Hitler. And this is why the Berlin Olympic Games in 1936 became the first Olympic superproduction in history. It cost more than $30 million at the time. And that was an insane amount of money back in the day. The precedent for host cities overspending on the Olympic Games, it all came from Nazi Germany. But the first big economic catastrophe, that came many years later with the Montreal Olympics in 1976.
Those games ended up costing 8 times more than the initial budget, and they had lasting financial consequences. Canada didn't finish paying the debt it incurred to finance those games until 2006. They even had to create a new special tax for tobacco in order to cover the cost.
And the story here, it's really simple. I mean, there are lots of cities who want to host the Olympics. But first, they need to be chosen by the IOC. And as you can imagine, the more you are willing to spend, the higher your chances of winning the bid. And listen, I can probably guess what you're thinking right now. Why is money that important to the International Olympic Committee? Didn't we just say that what matters here is the tolerance, the excellence, and the sports? Well, yeah, you are right, but the budget is not the only element that the IOC takes into account when it chooses a host city. There are plenty of other factors that they need to keep in mind.
Olympic bribery scandal threatens to shrink 2002 Winter Games.
And that is just one example. According to the IOC manual, each time they visit one candidate city, the town hall must pay for a 4- or 5-star hotel, an international breakfast, and luxury private cars for each of their members. And yes, this is actually specified in the written guidelines. And listen, according to recent investigations, the parties that are held to entertain the IOC members would pretty much make Berlusconi's orgies look like Sunday Mass. Alright, so you might think that with that last statement I'm exaggerating a little, but really, I'm not.
At least 2 IOC members accepted offers of prostitution from the Amsterdam committee that bid for the 1992 Summer Games.
As you can see, it's not like the IOC members live like rock stars. Indeed, I would say that rock stars wish they lived like IOC members. But, well, do you know what the best part of all of this is? Well, their organization makes millions of dollars every year, but they aren't even registered as a company. The IOC is technically a non-profit organization headquartered in Switzerland. Alright, so what does that actually mean? Well, essentially it means that they don't need to pay taxes and they can use all kinds of strategies to hide their accounting book. Well, it essentially means that they don't need to pay taxes and they can use all kinds of strategies to hide their accounting books. Now, you might remember that we previously did a video about esports where we talked about Formula One. Well, Formula One, well, that's a publicly traded company, and that's why on VisualPolitik we could give you accurate numbers for how much money they make. With the Olympics, it's far more difficult. You can make estimations based on how much they charge for the broadcasting rights, but that's pretty much it. So now you might be wondering, why am I sticking quite so much on how much money the IOC actually makes? Look, that's because when somebody has a good income and almost no spending, I mean, don't forget that the games are pretty much paid almost entirely by local governments, well, then you can invest in things like this.
AstroTurfing is the practice of masking the sponsors of a message or organization, for example, political, advertising, religious, or public relations, to make it appear as though it originates from and is supported by grassroots participants.
In other words, you can pay for things like the Olympic Studies Centers, which have a presence in several universities all around the globe. Their job is basically to produce academic research to prove, with scientific research and data, that hosting the Olympics is as good as winning the lottery. But listen, this is not the end of the story here. I told you some of the reasons why a city is chosen to host the Olympic. But this is still not the end of our story today. I told you some of the reasons previously why a city would be chosen to host the Olympics. Well, another one is what they call the Olympic feeling among the citizens. This means how much people in the city or country are actually in favor of hosting the games. So if you're watching this video from London, you probably have some idea of what I'm talking about. I mean, all of a sudden the local media is talking about it, your friends put the Olympic logo on their Facebook profile picture, and it's almost impossible to find critics on any talk show. I mean, it's really in the interest of the entire government and the sponsors to silence all of the discordant voices, so this is probably why this happens. And then, I mean, what's the conclusion we can draw from all of this? Well, in a city like Madrid, more than 85% of citizens wanted the Olympic Games, according to a survey. And a similar thing happened in Tokyo and in pretty much any other host city. So all of this explains partly the rush to organize the Olympics at pretty much any cost. Japan has already announced that they will spend over $20 billion United States dollars for their Tokyo Olympics in 2020. Rio de Janeiro in 2012 cost more than $12 billion for the Brazilian taxpayer. And then there's Greece. I mean, they're still paying their debts from Athens in 2004. Nonetheless, though, things, they are changing.
Is there any future for the Olympics?
As we said before, in the 90s and the first decade of this century, anytime the IOC met, there were around 5 candidate cities. Nonetheless, in the vote for the Olympics in 2020, the one that Tokyo won, there were just 3 candidates. In the last 2 bids for the Olympics 2024 and 2028, there wasn't even a single vote because there was only 1 candidate city. Los Angeles in one case and Paris in the other. Cities like Rome, Budapest and Stockholm, which once bid for the Olympics, have already simply retired from the race. They just don't think it's worth the money. And all of those economists who were once silenced, well, they're starting to appear in the media. Meanwhile, the Olympic Games are losing a lot of their appeal for audiences. There are less and less viewers every time it runs. Platforms like Netflix, HBO, or even indeed YouTube are becoming big competition for traditional television. This means that by the time Tokyo 2020 is held, many of you will be watching a TV show or a VisualPolitik video instead of the synchronized swimming competition. And so, well, now you might be wondering, well, how did the International Olympic Committee react to this? Well, the answer is probably going to disappoint you a little bit.
IOC Agenda 2020 allows the Olympics in different host countries.
I mean, I'm not saying this is a bad idea, but it does make little sense if your goal is to reduce wasted money when organizing the Olympic Games. I mean, yeah, it is good now that the spending could be divided among the taxpayers of 2 different countries, but they'll also have twice as many venues as before. So, in other words, it's not actually that great of an idea. Now, wait just a second here, because this is not the only proposal. You see, lately there's a movement that's suggesting something a bit more revolutionary. They want to get rid of city rotation. This would mean that the Olympic Games would always be organized in the same city. This way, we'd just need to buy 1 stadium and 1 Olympic villa that could be reused every single time. Some economists, like Andres Mbalist, suggest Los Angeles as the perfect city to become the eternal Olympic host. It's big enough, they have an international airport, and they can receive all the tourists, and they also have a pretty solid media industry.
But this solution has a problem. If there is no competition among cities to host the Olympics, then the IOC would lose its negotiating leverage. There would be no incentive to bribe or provide luxury to IOC leaders, and sooner or later, Los Angeles or some other city that would become the permanent host would start demanding things like a greater share of the money from the broadcasting rights.
So now the question comes around to, do you think the International Olympic Committee will find an alternative solution to get back their lost prestige? Or perhaps we will see the end of the Olympic Games as we know it? Well, please leave your answer in the comments section below. Meanwhile, if you want to know more about the Tokyo Olympics in 2020 and all of the troubles they are creating in Japan, do click here to see that video. Also, please do visit our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast at reconsidermedia.com. This is the podcast that provided the vocals in this video that were not mine. And don't forget that we publish brand new videos just like this every Monday and Thursday, so hit that subscribe button and you won't miss a post. And also, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear more of my lovely voice, don't forget to check out the Reconsider podcast at reconsidermedia.com.